each right now. Close your mouth. Pick any note and sustain it for 10 seconds. Feel where the vibration goes. Not in your throat. Further into the bones of your face, behind your cheeks, above your eyes, into the back of your skull. The vibration is not staying in your larynx, it is propagating through bone at 3,000 meters s, 9 times faster than sound travels through air. And it is entering a set of cavities carved into your skull that most people do not know they have. Those cavities are resonating, and the gas they produce under resonance changes the diameter of the blood vessels in your lungs within seconds. You just felt it. Now, what was happening inside the bone? Your skull contains 4 pairs of air-filled chambers. The paranasal sinuses hollowed into the bone of the face and forehead, maxillary sinuses behind the cheeks, the largest pair, the ones you feel vibrating most strongly when you hum, frontal sinuses behind the forehead, the vibration above your eyebrows, ethmoid sinuses between the eyes, small, numerous, delicate, sphenoid sinuses deep in the skull behind the ethmoids, the deepest chambers, the ones you feel as a resonance in the center of your head rather than on the surface. Each pair is a separate air-filled cavity lined with ciliated mucous membrane connected to the nasal passage through a narrow opening called the ostium. They are not vestigial. They are not drainage passages waiting to get infected. They are resonance chambers, bony cavities with specific volumes, specific geometries, and specific resonant frequencies determined by the physics of the air column they contain and the dimensions of the ostium that connects them to the airway. Vibration you felt behind your cheeks when you hummed. That was your maxillary sinuses resonating. The vibration above your eyebrows was your frontal sinuses. The sense of the sound being inside your head, rather than in your throat, was bone conduction, carrying the vibration through the cranial vault at 3,000 to 4,000 meters per second, 9 to 12 times faster than sound through air, and delivering it to every bony cavity simultaneously. When an external vibration matches or approaches the resonant frequency of a cavity, the air inside oscillates at maximum amplitude. This is acoustic resonance, the physics that makes a wine glass sing when you run a wet finger around its rim, that makes a pipe organ produce sound from air flowing through tubes of specific length. Your sinuses are Helmholtz resonators, chambers with narrow necks that amplify specific frequencies. When you hum, the vocal cords produce a fundamental frequency between 100 and 400 hertz. That vibration propagates through the lingual cartilage, through the hyoid bone, through the mandible, through the temporal bone, and into the cranial vault. Skull becomes a vibrating shell. The sinuses inside it resonate. Oscillating air pressure inside the sinuses during humming is measurably higher than during quiet breathing, during speech, or during any other vocal activity. Because sustained humming maintains a continuous resonant input that speech with its constantly changing frequencies and articulation breaks cannot. Humming is the only vocal activity that holds a single frequency long enough for the sinus cavities to reach full resonance. Speech changes frequency with every syllable. Singing changes pitch with every note. Humming holds one frequency, and the sinuses respond. Not all frequencies produce equal resonance. The maxillary sinuses, the largest pair, resonate at approximately 200 to 350 hertz, depending on individual anatomy. The fundamental frequency of a male hum typically falls between 100 and 200 hertz. Female between 200 and 400. Female humming frequencies naturally fall closer to maxillary sinus resonance, which may explain why some studies show greater nasal no output in female subjects. For maximum resonance coupling, the optimal hum pitch is a comfortable mid-range note, not the lowest note you can produce, which may fall below sinus resonance, and not the highest, which may exceed it. Note, most people naturally produce when humming without thinking about pitch tends to fall in the range of maxillary sinus resonance. Whether this is coincidence, anatomical correlation, or unconscious selection by the body for maximum resonance coupling has not been formally studied. You do not need to find the right note. The note that feels most natural, that requires the least effort, that sustains with the least strain. That note is likely close to the frequency your sinuses are tuned to. Maniscalco and colleagues published in the European Respiratory Journal that the frequency and amplitude of humming correlated with nasal nitric oxide output. Louder humming and frequencies closer to sinus resonance produced higher levels. The physics favors a relaxed, sustained mid-range hum, the kind you produce absent-mindedly while cooking, while walking, while sitting in a quiet room, the kind that feels natural rather than performed. The absence of effort is not laziness. It is resonance, the body finding the frequency that couples most efficiently with the bony chambers in its own skull. What matters is the gas, because what the sinuses produce under resonance is the part that connects a 60-second hum to the cardiovascular system, and the connection runs through the mucosal lining of every sinus cavity in your skull, sinus epithelium. The mucosal lining of every sinus cavity continuously produces nitric oxide through constitutive nitric oxide synthesis. During quiet breathing, this NO diffuses slowly through the ostia into the nasal airway and is inhaled in small quantities with each breath. The production is constant. The delivery is limited by diffusion. The narrow ostium restricts the rate at which the gas can escape from the sinus into the airway. The sinuses are producing a vasodilator continuously. Most of it sits in the cavity, accumulating slowly because the ostium is too narrow for efficient passive diffusion. This has a secondary implication for the person over 65 who experiences recurrent sinus infections. Nitric oxide is antimicrobial. It inhibits bacterial and fungal growth in the sinus cavities. The node that accumulates in the sinuses during quiet breathing maintains a baseline antimicrobial environment. Humming, by flushing the accumulated N out and stimulating fresh production, cycles the antimicrobial environment more actively. Studies of humming in patients with chronic sinusitis have shown improved sinus ventilation and reduced infection frequency. The acoustic pumping physically ventilates the sinus cavities in addition to delivering the antimicrobial NO. The sinus that is regularly vibrated is the sinus that is regularly ventilated, regularly flushed with antimicrobial gas, and less likely to develop the stagnant environment in which infection thrives. Weitzberg and Lundberg at the Karolinska Institute, whose finding was mentioned in the singing discussion, measured nasal NO output during humming versus quiet breathing and found a 15-fold increase from approximately 0.2 to 3 parts per million in exhaled nasal air. 15-fold, not a percentage increase, not a doubling, a multiplication by 15%, a magnitude increase that would be considered extraordinary for any single intervention, and the mechanism is purely acoustic. Oscillating air pressure during humming dramatically increases the gas exchange rate between the sinus cavity and the nasal airway. Each pressure oscillation flushes NO-enriched air out of the sinus through the ostium and draws fresh air in. The endo that would accumulate slowly during quiet breathing, diffusing through a narrow opening at the pace physics allows, is pumped out with each vibration cycle and replaced by fresh air that stimulates further production. The sinus is the production chamber, humming is the pump, the ostium is the valve. The vibration frequency determines the pumping rate. 15-fold is not a pharmacological dose. It is a mechanical amplification. The sinus producing N at its normal rate. The humming pumping it out 15 times faster than quiet breathing delivers it. Think about what happens to that gas once it enters the nasal airway. You inhale it with your next breath. After humming, the NO-enriched air that the humming pumped out of the sinuses travels down the trachea and into the lungs. At the alveolar membrane, the thin barrier where gas exchange occurs between air and blood, the NO crosses into the pulmonary capillary blood. Once in the blood, nitric oxide activates soluble guanylate cycles in vascular smooth muscle cells, increasing intracellular cyclic GMP, which relaxes the smooth muscle and dilates the pulmonary vascule. This is the identical molecular mechanism of sildenafil, the pharmaceutical vasodilator that generates billions in annual revenue. The molecular pathway is not similar. It is identical. One enzyme, one second messenger, one smooth muscle response, one vasodilatory outcome. Indistinguishable at the molecular level. Your sinuses are manufacturing the molecule. Humming is delivering it to your lungs through acoustic pumping of bony resonance chambers in your skull. Pulmonary vasodilation has a downstream consequence. You can understand through the physics of gas exchange. Oxygen crosses the alveolar membrane into the blood by diffusion. The rate of diffusion depends on the surface area of the membrane in contact with blood, the thickness of the membrane, and the partial pressure gradient driving the oxygen across. When pulmonary capillaries dilate, more capillary surface area comes into contact with the alveolar membrane. More surface area means more diffusion area. More diffusion area means more oxygen transfer per breath. Each hum cycle that pumps NO from the sinuses into the lungs produces a brief period of enhanced pulmonary vasodilation and improved oxygen transfer efficiency. The effect is mild. This is not supplemental oxygen, not a bronchodilator, not a pharmaceutical intervention. It is a modest increase in the efficiency of a gas exchange system that was already working, but it is measurable and it occurs with every hum. If you have ever noticed that a period of humming absent-mindedly while cooking, while walking, while sitting quietly left you feeling slightly clearer, slightly more alert, slightly more present, that is not placebo and it is not imagination. It is enhanced oxygen transfer. Your lungs just operated at marginally higher efficiency because your sinuses delivered a vasodilator that the humming pumped out of bony cavities in your skull. The clarity you attributed to the meditative quality of humming was partly vascular. More oxygen reaching the brain because the pulmonary capillaries were dilated by a gas your own body manufactured. That identity, the molecular pathway of a 60-con hum being indistinguishable from the molecular pathway of a pharmaceutical vasodilator produced by an organ most people associate only with sinus infections delivered by acoustic pumping that requires nothing but a closed mouth, reframes what the sinuses are because it means the sinuses are not passive cavities. They are production chambers for a cardiovascular molecule equipped with a delivery system that a hum activates, and the gas is only the first mechanism because the vibration that drives the sinus resonance is simultaneously propagating through every bone in your skull, and it is reaching structures that external sound cannot. When you hum, the vocal cords vibrate the lingual cartilage, which transmits vibration through the hyoid bone, through the mandible, through the temporal bone, and into the entire cranial vault. This is bone conduction. Mechanical vibration propagating through solid structures at 3,000 to 4,000 meters per second, far faster than through air. Your skull becomes a vibrating shell, and every structure inside it receives the vibration through the bone. Your inner ear detects bone-conducted vibration through the cochlea. This is why you hear your own hum as louder and deeper than anyone else hears it. The bone pathway delivers low-frequency vibration directly to the cochlea, bypassing the air pathway that attenuates low frequencies. The vibration the inner ear receives during humming is qualitatively different from any external sound. It is full-spectrum, bone-conducted, and continuous. The vestibular organs adjacent to the cochlea also receive this vibration. Whether this produces the subjective groundedness that many people report during sustained humming has not been measured. The connection is anatomically plausible but not confirmed. The vestibular system is receiving a continuous, predictable low-frequency input. Whether it interprets that input as stability, producing the grounded feeling humming often carries remains an inference from anatomy, not a measured finding. Bone conduction pathway means the vibration reaches the vagus nerve, not only through the tissue surrounding the larynx, but through the temporal bone adjacent to the nerve's intraradial course. The vagus receives the vibration from two directions simultaneously, locally at the larynx and remotely through the skull. The dual delivery is unique to humming. External sounds do not produce it. Speech does not sustain it. Singing interrupts it. Only humming delivers continuous bone-conducted vibration to the vagus through both pathways for the full duration of the note. Consider what that means for the nerve. Vagus nerve passes directly alongside the larynx, separated from the vibrating vocal cords by millimeters of tissue. During humming, sustained vocal cord vibration mechanically stimulates the vagus through the surrounding tissue, not through a neural pathway, not through a reflex arc, but through direct mechanical vibration of the nerve itself. The vagal mechanism is the pathway. The singing discussion described lingual vibration activating the vagus through physical proximity. What humming adds is sustained, uninterrupted contact. The vagus cannot ignore it. The nerve is physically shaking at the frequency of the hum, and the shaking activates its afferent fibers the way any mechanical stimulus activates a nerve through mechanosensitive ion channels in the nerve membrane that open in response to physical deformation. If you were wearing a heart rate monitor while humming, you would see the effect within 15 to 20 seconds. Heart rate drops not dramatically, typically 2 to 5 beats per minute, and heart rate variability increases. The vagal activation is shifting the autonomic balance toward parasympathetic dominance. You would feel it as a subtle settling, a sense of the chest opening, the shoulders dropping slightly, the jaw releasing tension you did not realize you were holding. The feeling arrives without effort because the mechanism does not require effort. The vibration stimulates the nerve responds, the heart slows, no conscious regulation needed. This is a third pathway to vagal activation, distinct from the baroreceptor feedback that slow breathing produces, distinct from the trigeminal vagal reflex that cold water on the face triggers. Humming stimulates the vagus through direct mechanical contact at the anatomical site where the nerve is most superficial and most exposed to lingual vibration. The three pathways, respiratory, trigeminal, and mechanical, are independent. Each produces vagal activation through a different mechanism. Humming activates one of them continuously for as long as the hum is sustained. Humming produces a more sustained vagal stimulus than singing because humming maintains continuous vocal cord vibration without the interruptions of articulation, consonants, breathing gaps, and pitch changes that singing requires. A person humming a single sustained note for 60 seconds delivers an unbroken mechanical stimulus to the vagus. 60 seconds of singing with its consonants, vowel transitions, and breathing pauses produces an intermittent stimulus. Vibration gap, vibration gap. Humming eliminates the gaps. The simplicity is the advantage, you see. And the vagal pathway is running simultaneously with a breathing mechanism that humming forces without any conscious control, because humming can only occur during exhalation, and that physical constraint produces a breathing ratio that clinical protocols spend weeks teaching patients to achieve. Humming is exhalation. Inhale is necessarily silent. You cannot hum while breathing in. Try it. The vocal cords require exhaled air flowing past them to vibrate. Inhaled air flows in the wrong direction. Inhaled air flows in the wrong direction. A natural hum cycle therefore produces an exhale to inhale ratio of approximately 3:1 to 4:1. The hum extends the exhale to 8 to 12 seconds while the inhale remains 2 to 3 seconds. This ratio is the range that maximally shifts autonomic balance toward parasympathetic dominance. You do not need to count. You do not need to follow a pattern. The vocal cords enforce the ratio. The hum extends the exhale because the hum is the exhale. The inhale is brief because it is a pause between hums. The body takes what it needs and returns to the note. Exhale activates the vagus through a second pathway, the baroreceptor reflex. Your aortic arch and choroidal sinus detect the slight blood pressure increase during extended exhalation and trigger vagal output to slow the heart. This is the mechanism behind every clinical breathing protocol. Box breathing, 4 and 78 breathing, coherence breathing. All of them are trying to achieve the exhale-dominant ratio that humming produces automatically as a physical consequence of how the vocal cords work. Protocols require training. They require counting. Inhale for 4, hold for 7, exhale for 8. They require sustained attention to maintain the ratio. They require weeks of practice before the pattern becomes habitual. Humming requires nothing but a closed mouth and a note. A person who hums for 60 seconds is performing without instruction, without counting, without training. The breathing pattern that the clinical literature identifies is optimal for parasympathetic activation. The vocal cords enforce the ratio. The lungs comply. The vagus responds, and then two vagal pathways operating simultaneously. Direct mechanical vibration of the nerve and baroreceptor-mediated exhale activation, producing a combined parasympathetic shift that neither pathway produces alone. The person who hums for 60 seconds is receiving vagal stimulation through two independent mechanisms running in parallel. Heart rate decreases, heart rate variability increases. The autonomic nervous system shifts from sympathetic to parasympathetic dominance, not because the person decided to relax, but because the physics of a vibrating vocal cord and a closed aortas produce the neural and respiratory inputs that the autonomic system interprets as safety. The dual pathway matters because each one alone has limitations. Mechanical vagal stimulation without the breathing ratio produces a more modest autonomic shift. The nerve is vibrating, but the baroreceptor pathway is not contributing. Extended exhale without the mechanical vibration produces a gradual shift, effective but slow, requiring sustained attention to maintain the ratio. Humming activates both pathways simultaneously through a single action. The vibration is automatic. The vocal cords produce it. The breathing ratio is automatic. The exhale to inhale constraint produces it. Neither requires conscious maintenance. The person hums, both pathways fire. The autonomic shift is the sum of two independent inputs arriving through two independent neural routes. Person over 65 who's been told to practice relaxation techniques, who has tried meditation and found it difficult, who has attempted breathing exercises and lost count, who feels that just relax is advice that does not come with a mechanism, has a 60-second intervention that produces measurable autonomic shift through physics rather than psychology. The hum does not require the person to feel calm. It produces calm as a physiological consequence of two vagal pathways activating simultaneously. The calm arrives whether the person believes it will or not, because the nerve does not require belief, it requires vibration. Person who hums for 60 seconds before bed, sitting on the edge of the bed, eyes closed, one sustained note, is performing a multi-system intervention without knowing it. Sinus node production is flushing a vasodilator into the lungs with each hum cycle, improving oxygen transfer. Vagal stimulation is shifting the autonomic balance toward parasympathetic dominance, the state the body needs to initiate and maintain sleep. The exhale-dominant ratio is slowing the heart rate and increasing heart rate variability. The intrathoracic pressure oscillations are gently moving the cerebral spinal fluid. The vibration in the skull may be contributing the vestibular input that produces the groundedness many people report during sustained humming. All of this from a closed mouth and a note held for the length of a normal exhale, well, deeper into the skull, because the vibration that resonates the sinuses and stimulates the vagus is also doing something to the fluid surrounding your brain. And this is the layer the research is only beginning to map. During humming, the closed glottis and sustained exhalation produce a slight elevation in intrathoracic pressure. The pressure inside your chest cavity increases because the air is being pushed against a partially closed valve. This pressure increase transmits through the venous system to the intracranial space, a direct hydraulic connection through the internal jugular veins and the dural venous sinuses. The veins connecting your chest to your skull are open tubes. Pressure changes in the chest propagate to pressure changes in the skull within a cardiac cycle. The result is a gentle rhythmic oscillation of intracranial pressure synchronized with the humming frequency, a pulsation that quiet breathing produces at a lower amplitude and that humming amplifies through the added resistance of the closed glottis. Cerebral spinal fluid, the fluid that surrounds and cushions the brain, that fills the ventricles, that circulates through the subaqueous space, oscillates in response to these pressure changes. The fluid is not static. It moves with every heartbeat, with every breath, with every change in intrathoracic pressure. Intracranial pressure oscillations, synchronized with respiratory phase, are well documented in neurology. Dreja and colleagues demonstrated that respiratory-driven CSF flow is a significant component of cerebrospinal fluid dynamics. Humming amplifies the respiratory pressure component through the added airway resistance of the closed glottis, producing larger, more rhythmic CSF oscillations than quiet breathing generates. Lymphatic system. The brain's waste clearance pathway depends on CSF movement through the pervascular spaces of the brain. The system was described in detail in the sleep position discussion. CSF flowing along pervascular channels collecting metabolic waste, including amyloid beta draining through parivus pathways. Any intervention that increases CSF pulsatility that moves the fluid more actively through these channels potentially enhances the clearance of metabolic waste. Humming, by driving rhythmic intracranial pressure oscillations through the mechanics of a closed glottis and sustained exhalation, may contribute to this pulsatility. Now, the evidence calibration, because the 5 mechanisms described here sit at different levels of certainty and honesty, requires transparency about which shelf each one occupies. The no data is strong. Weitzberg and Lundberg measured it directly. The 15-fold increase is replicated. The mechanism is understood at the molecular level. The vagal data is established. Mechanical vibration of the nerve is documented. The autonomic shift is measurable in real time. The breathing ratio is physics. The exhale to inhale ratio is a consequence of vocal cord mechanics, not a hypothesis to be tested. The CSF oscillation is the most preliminary layer. Intracranial pressure changes from respiratory mechanics are documented. That humming amplifies these changes through added glottal resistance is physically consistent. That the amplified CSF pulsatility enhances glymphatic clearance during a 60-con hum has not been directly measured. The physics supports the connection. The direct evidence does not yet exist. The viewer should know which shelf each mechanism sits on, and the CSF mechanism sits on a different shelf than the no data. That distinction. 5 mechanisms operating simultaneously from a single closed-mouth vibration, each at a different level of evidence, the strongest replicated and measured, and the most speculative supported by physics, but not yet confirmed. Is the convergence I cannot walk past in the bioacoustics literature? Because it means a 60-second hum is not a relaxation technique. It is not meditation. It is not a breathing exercise. It is a multi-system intervention that the physics of acoustic resonance, bone conduction, and respiratory mechanics produce, and that the existing evidence partially but not fully confirms. The confirmed mechanisms alone: sinus end production, vagal stimulation, exhale dominant breathing ratio would justify the 60 seconds. The preliminary mechanisms, CSF oscillation, lymphatic enhancement, may eventually extend the justification further. The physics supports all five. The evidence confirms three. The viewer should hold the distinction. What you felt when you hummed at the start of this discussion. The vibration in the face, the resonance behind the cheeks and forehead, the sense of something shifting in the skull, was the activation of bony resonance chambers pumping a vasodilator into your airway. The mechanical stimulation of a cranial nerve running alongside your vocal cords. An exhale-dominant breathing ratio, your vocal cords enforced without instruction, and a gentle oscillation of the fluid surrounding your brain driven by the pressure mechanics of a closed glottis. 4 confirmed mechanisms running simultaneously. 1 speculative mechanism consistent with the physics. 1 note: pharmaceutical industry spent billions developing inhaled nitric oxide delivery systems for pulmonary vasodilation systems that require compressed gas cylinders, precision flow regulators, specialized delivery masks, continuous monitoring equipment, and hospital settings with trained respiratory therapists. Your skull already contains the delivery system. 4 pairs of production chambers connected to the airway through narrow osteo, producing the molecule continuously waiting for the acoustic pump that flushes it into the lungs. The pump is a hum, the delivery system is the sinus architecture you were born with. The molecule is the one the hospital charges thousands of dollars per treatment to deliver through industrial equipment. 60 seconds of humming delivers it at your kitchen table, not at pharmaceutical concentrations. The dose from humming is mild. The vasodilatory effect is modest, and nobody is suggesting that humming replaces medical nitric oxide therapy for the critical conditions that require it. The pharmaceutical application exists for a reason. Neonatal pulmonary hypertension, acute respiratory distress, conditions where the dose must be precise and the delivery must be continuous. Humming is not that. Humming is the loud dose, self-administered, daily accessible version of a molecular pathway that the body possesses. The mechanism is identical. The dose is different. The accessibility is incomparable. The pharmaceutical version requires a hospital. The biological version requires closing your mouth. 4 pairs of air-filled chambers carved into the bone of your face. A gas produced inside them that relaxes the blood vessels of your lungs with every hum cycle. A nerve that vibrates when the vocal cords vibrate and cannot stop responding to the mechanical input it receives. A breathing ratio that clinical protocols spend weeks training and that a closed mouth produces on the first try. And a fluid surrounding your brain that oscillates when the skull vibrates gently, rhythmically, at the frequency of the note you chose. You felt all of this at the start of this discussion, in the 10 seconds you hummed before the explanation began. The vibration in the face was sinus resonance. The sense of calm arriving was dual vagal activation. The extended exhale was autonomic rebalancing. The groundedness may have been vestibular input from bone conduction. The mechanisms were running before you knew their names. They will run again tonight if you hum before sleep. Close your mouth. Pick a note. 60 seconds. The skull does the